Escape remained out of prison, labor conditions worsened. The Women's Trade Union called for equal treatment in the labor force. The AFL appointed a black social worker, Mildred Rankin, to head the National Office of Colored Women Workers. And when it became clear that the blacks would have to organize, they actually organized another organization called the Office of Colored Women Workers, and to organize themselves to fight for their rights, with the purpose of organizing and protecting black working women. In September of 1917, the organization in Norfolk, Virginia attempted to organize some 600 black women domestics, waitresses, nurses, and tobacco stemmers to demand higher wages and better working conditions. When their demands were not met, a vote to strike against the American Cigar Company brought about the first major shift and the first unions which included black women. Fast forwarding, the toughest and the longest contribution of service to our people and to our country came about during the suffrage campaign. As it was for whites, blacks recognized that the vote represented the key to empowerment. And for black women, suffrage was both a feminist and a racial demand for equality. It was toward the Anthony Amendment when white suffragists decided to court the black female support. Long story short, it was a trap. There would be many white and black women activists, and men too, who would fight for the next decade for equality. But it was the right to vote which aggravated white women the most. If the two female sides had been able to work together to challenge the respective images, there is no telling what could have been achieved. But white women did not want to share voting rights with black women. Simple and period. In the 1840s and 1850s, both the race and feminist issues were intensified, and white women's discontentment with their position in society was as much cause and effect of their involvement in the anti-slavery movement. But their energies were not directed toward the goal of black liberation, but toward their own agenda. It was obvious the white and black women abolitionists would part ways due in part to white racism. Though they each shared a mutual feeling of feminism, when it came to a question of priorities, race came first for black women. For as Stewart stated, the issue of race sparked our feminism. The authority of the black male had diminished, and coupled with his inability to protect and support his family, abolition coincided with the influx of European immigrants who replaced them in occupations that they, the black men, had traditionally held. As such, black women were again forced to work, which in turn saved many families from utter destruction. It was the 15th Amendment, which would give black women the right to vote, that also quoted black women. Whether or not to support it brought back the priority of race versus sex, and black women knew that supporting the amendment may be the best means of securing their own well-being. Women like Sojourner Truth and Frances Ellen Harper held differing views. Truth, not supporting it because she was concerned that it would be putting more power into the hands of men, that it would add to the oppression of black women. Harper, supporting it, had more faith that the obstacle to progress of the black woman was not the black man, but white racism, including the racism of her white sisters. Black leaders and black women activists discovered that white women, who should have been their natural allies, often became their formidable adversaries. White suffragist leaders either acquiesced to or took advantage of the anti-black slave sentiment. Black men and black women were working effectively, evident in the suffrage period movement took center stage after 14 years of relatively inactivity, 1896 to 1910. But it was white men who did not want the white woman to vote. Instead, they felt it an insult, as they traditionally voted for the best interests as head of their household. For Afro-American women, it was a demand for justice, for the race, and for themselves that energized them on. They continued to organize, and over the next 40 years, black activist leaders raised money, educated teachers and children, built and ran schools, hospitals, and cared for the poor, the sick, and the elderly. Local organizations such as the Black Chamber of Commerce, established in 1915 to lend money to blacks, and the NAACP was founded. Black women started organizations of their own and from state to state, garnered support for their causes, those of and for the race. And they used their power to not only aid in the passage of the 15th Amendment, but they also put black men in Congress. The black woman's contribution to the suffrage campaign is rarely written about, yet it has had a more consistent attitudes toward how we obtained the right to vote. With the founding of the NAACP, SCLC, and others, blacks began to evoke their rights. The women of the NAACP began massive membership drives and voter registrations in the South and set up offices as well to initiate community action against de facto segregation in school systems. But you have to know that by this time in history, our history of service, of giving, and of aiding the cause, our very own, had already taken center stage. No other woman would better personify or work more vigorously toward the goals of economic freedom for women than Mary McLeod, whose presence will dominate black women's history in the decades to come. And the founding of the National Council of Negro Women, its mission, programs, and studies is still yet extensive and quite comprehensive. With at least 30 national organizations founded between 1896 and 1935, including several college-based sororities and a number of religious, political, and professional organizations, all addressing specific issues relevant to the priorities of black women. Bethune recognized that the effectiveness of these organizations was frequently undermined by program duplication and a degree of competitiveness. Having served as the president of the Florida State Federation of Colored Women's Clubs and later as the national president of the National Association of Colored Women, NACW, and having experienced the systems of such society, Bethune felt a great need for an organization of organizations which could effectively harness the power of nearly 1 million women into a force for constructive action. She was asking women's organizations to give up a little power to acquire great power. And power is what NCNW represents. Under the leadership of 4 great presidents, each leading during a period when the nation and the world were undergoing great political and social change. Ms. Mary McLeod Bethune's administration opening with the Great Depression. Ms. Dr. Dorothy Golding Freebie beginning with the Civil Rights Movement. Ms. Vivian Carter Mason beginning on the eve of the Supreme Court decision, and Ms. Dorothy Irene Height on the eve of the Civil Rights Revolution of 1960s. Under these past presidents, our distinguished organization has accomplished more than any other women's group. The national program administered through 13 committees was carefully designed to achieve credibility for the council through affiliation and collaboration with organizations and associations in every aspect of American life. Community service at its best. NCNW has extended its focus upon public affairs, employment, citizenship, family life, religion, post-war planning, consumer education, rural life, membership, and personnel, all which affect change. And while the NCNW made known the acts of discrimination, it also impressed upon black workers their responsibility to maintain a professional attitude and appearance and to develop job-related skills. The council campaigned for the integration of blacks into the military and fought for the admission as well, and was actively called upon for many conferences by the President of the United States and even Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. These included conferences on employment, child care, and on women's participation in the war. NCNW was the only national black women's organization represented to witness the founding of the United Nations and has since maintained as an official observer at the United Nations. Under Dr. Height's presidency, many more Bethune streams have been realized. The organization began obtaining its tax-exempt status, which solved many of the council's financial problems. 2 major grants for the ambitious and critical programs to recruit and train Negro women for volunteer community service was a cause for celebration. The erection of the Bethune Memorial Statue in 1963 and its unveiling in 1974 was a monumental achievement. For in America, any statue erected on public land was primarily for white males and to a lesser degree, white females. The Bethune statue, sculptured by Robert Burks became the first memorial to a Black American and to a woman in our nation's capital. Located in Lincoln Park, it is appropriately facing the Emancipation Booth, which depicts President Lincoln breaking the chains from the slave. From 1965 to 1980, at least 40 national projects were initiated to address youth employment, housing, health, consumerism, hunger and malnutrition, civil rights, volunteerism, women's issues, international problems, and family life. We've also been very active internationally. The Council succeeded in publicizing the progressive movement among Cuban women. With a grant from the Agency of our International Development, NCNW established the international division within our organization to provide a unique opportunity for Black women to work with women in Africa, the Caribbean, and other parts of the world. The Hold Your Jobs campaign, which began in the 1940s, led to the opening of a women's center for education and career advancement for minority women. Located in Manhattan, New York, the center co-sponsors with us in Pace University an associate's degree program in business. NCNW has had a long-standing commitment to the poor. A study was led by Height in 1967 for the purpose of documenting and experiences of participants in the federal and local food-related programs and to explore the problems of administering such programs. NCNW made a number of recommendations which included the distribution of free food stamps to low-income families, the provision of free lunches to children whose parents qualified for food stamps, the inspection of food by federal agents, the administration of the food stamp program by the USDA, and the hiring of disadvantaged individuals. Community service at its best. The Bethune Museum interprets the National Council for Women created the National Archives for Black Women's History and the Bethune Memorial Museum. The organization continues to sponsor these two, the only two institutions in the United States which focuses solely on the documentation and preservation of Black women's history. It is no longer necessary to ask, what does NCNW do? The more appropriate question is, what is it that NCNW does not do? Yet, as Paula Giddings states, the present-day crisis of Black families and Black communities, the impact of the women's movement, and the still unrealized potential of Black leadership demand a reassessment of Black women's roles. For you see, we are what community service is. Thank you so much.